Hey there, and welcome back to Family Travel Unpacked. I'm your host, Melissa, and in case you're new here, you can find tons of detailed destination guides, travel tips, hacks, and more on my website, thefamilyvoyage.com. And if you've been enjoying the show, be sure to hit follow wherever you're listening so you never miss an episode, and drop a 5-star review while you're at it because it really helps other families find the show. And speaking of not missing an episode, after a little bit of a pause, this is officially the start of Season 2 of Family Travel Unpacked. Thanks for sticking with me through Season 1, for all the messages about which trips you ended up booking, and for the reviews that keep this show findable in the first place. I've got a full slate of new destinations, recaps, and planning conversations coming up this season, and I wanted to kick things off with something that's super timely. So here's the thing. I write a lot of destination guides over on the blog. I just checked when I was putting my notes together for this episode, and I'm closing in on 400 articles on every kind of trip you can imagine, from full-time travel to resort weeks to national parks and even the logistics of flying internationally with kids. And out of every single one of them, the article that has been hands down my most popular of the entire year is, drumroll please, my Fall Break Roundup. It's the article every mom seems to look for the day after the kids go back to school when she realizes that her family's going to have the perfect opportunity to get away in just 8 weeks, but they still don't have anything planned. So that's what today's episode is. I'm walking through it out loud, plus adding a few more new options to inspire you. And some of these are going to be fall classics, but I promise that there will be at least a handful that you probably haven't thought of for your own fall break. If you want to check out the article, I've got it linked in the show notes down below, or you can hop over to thefamilyvoyage.com/fallbreak. There are also links in the show notes to a lot of in-depth articles covering the destinations that I'm going to talk about in this episode. Now, before I get into the specific options, I want to give a quick word on why I think that fall break is worth building a trip around at all, because a lot of families probably overlook it next to the bigger chunks like winter break, spring break, and summer vacation. First off, there are plenty of places where you're going to get much more pleasant weather than summer. There's less humidity and it's just not as hot, so it's more comfortable for actually walking around all day without the kids complaining that they're wilting. You're also going to get smaller crowds in a lot of places than you would over spring break, which also usually has pretty good weather. And unlike winter break and summer vacation, you're not competing with the entire country for flights and hotel rooms because not every school district gives a fall break, and the ones that do, there's a little variability in exactly when they occur. Plus, a fall break trip might be easier on the wallet, though that's not true everywhere. Like, I'm not going to lie to you and say that you're going to get a smoking deal on a hotel in Vermont in October. Sorry guys, I'm not a magician. But the whole idea behind this list is that with a little planning and creativity, you can squeeze in another awesome getaway and let their shoulder season timing do a lot of the work for you so that you're going to get a better trip for less stress and less money. I've tried to stick to decent weather areas. If you go too far north this time of year, a lot of places are already sliding into cold, rainy weather, but if you go too far to the southeast, you're technically in the hurricane belt, and that isn't a risk that I love taking on a trip I can't get refunded. There are a handful of spots that I'm going to mention in this episode where you're going to face that specific risk, but I'll point them out when we get there. If you're a regular listener, you've heard me talk about how I don't usually set a strict budget going into our trips. I just focus on minimizing our out-of-pocket costs where I can by using points and miles for our flights and hotels. To do that most effectively for big trips, I try to book as early as possible. Sometimes that's 10 or 12 months out because that's when the best award availability shows up. But thankfully, for a trip that's closer to home and in the shoulder season, you can usually still score a good deal a month or two out if you're not committed to a specific destination. So as I go through these, I'm going to flag the points and miles angles where I think they can really help, because at least for our family, that's usually the difference between a trip that feels like a splurge and one that I can book with absolutely no guilt. I'll just mention one more thing because I really value your time. In this episode, I'm going region by region, starting on the East Coast, moving through the middle of the country, and then out west. Most of us are working with 4, maybe 5 days for fall break, so you don't want 2 of those days eaten up by just getting somewhere and back. Staying closer to home stretches the actual time you get on the ground and minimizes time zone shifts. If you want to jump to the area that's most relevant for your family, feel free to check the timestamps down below in the show notes and skip ahead to what's relevant to you. All right, let's get into it, starting on the East Coast. I got to start with one of my favorite fall destinations, and that's New York City. I've been to New York in all different times of year, and personally, I think it's when the city's at its finest, and it's totally different than the middle of winter or the middle of summer. Central Park turns into an actual autumn postcard. There's no humidity, and because you're not competing with the spring break crowds either, you got a little elbow room at places like the Statue of Liberty and the Natural History Museum. If you've got school-age kids, the Museum of Math was so fun that we literally had to drag hours away to catch our flight last time we were in the city. In the evening, you can take those school-age kids to one of the Disney on Broadway shows like The Lion King, which I personally think is amazing no matter how old you are. For older kids or teens, you can just enter a bunch of ticket lotteries and see what you get. Usually it's only for 2 tickets, so your family might have to split up. But last time we were able to get 4 lottery tickets to Peter Pan Gone Wrong, and the kids loved it. There are just way more things to do in New York with kids than I can cover in here, and I do have an article over on the blog where I've covered a lot of what we've done. Although honestly, I need to go back and add even more from our last visit, plus I'm sure we'll do more when we go back this fall. In terms of where to stay, look at the Trip by Wyndham in Times Square if you've got a bigger family. Some of those rooms can actually fit 6 or even 8 people comfortably, which is really rare to find in Manhattan. And if you're sitting on credit card points like we are, this is exactly the kind of expensive room rate city where redeeming them can make a ton of sense. Just watch out for what kind of beds are included in the rooms. The Hyatt Centric in Times Square is only 30,000 points per night for all of October and November, and the standard rooms there have 2 queen beds rather than 2 doubles. One of the reasons I think New York is perfect for fall break is because I prefer going for only 4, maybe 5 days. We don't spend a ton of time in a huge city like that, and our experience has been that we all start to get a little overstimulated if we stay for longer. If the big city isn't your thing and you still want to get that fall foliage, but you're not quite into the intense New England scene, the Finger Lakes region of New York is so underrated, and it's actually driving distance for a lot of families in the Mid-Atlantic as well as here in Ohio. Otherwise, if you're further away, you can fly into Rochester or Syracuse. From there, it's all waterfalls, wineries, and plenty of peak leaf peeping, but without the unbelievable crowds that you'd find in, say, New Hampshire or Vermont. Don't get me wrong, October is the busiest month in the Finger Lakes precisely because it's so gorgeous. But it'll still be more manageable than the other options, and if you're lucky enough to have a longer stretch off from school, it should quiet down midweek. We loved Watkins Glen State Park, and it's got a beautiful hiking trail that winds right past a ton of different waterfalls, and those are going to be beautiful to photograph, especially with all the changing colors. Plus, it tires the kids out big time at the end of the day. If you do catch a rainy day, there's also the Corning Museum of Glass, which we loved, and it's got a studio where you can do hands-on projects, and they even have stuff that's available for younger kids. Basing yourself in the town of Watkins Glen is really convenient, but you could also opt for Canandaigua or Geneva if you want a slightly more northern base, or you can't find something in Watkins Glen that works for your budget and the space that you need. Now, having grown up just outside Washington, D.C., I can tell you that fall is definitely the sweet spot. It doesn't feel like a swamp, but it's also not mobbed by the cherry blossom crowds and the school trips like the spring is. There's usually great strolling weather, and the metro's efficient enough that for a long weekend, you honestly don't have to rent a car. A lot of the best museums are totally free, although there are some that now require advanced time tickets, so be sure to check before you go rather than just showing up and hoping for the best. We've done so many fun things in DC that you can't do anywhere else, like touring the White House or going on a nighttime guided tour of the monuments. In terms of where to stay, the Holiday Inn on the National Mall is just 1 block from Air and Space, and it has a seasonal rooftop pool with a fantastic view of the Capitol, which your kids are definitely going to remember longer than most of the museums. If you want to go a little more budget-friendly, there's a Hampton Inn in Alexandria's Old Town that puts you right on the Metro line, and it's a super charming, quaint area to walk around in and grab dinner and check out the little shops. If you're traveling on points, Hyatt has a bunch of properties that are in the 15,000 to 25,000 point range per night, and if you have a Club Access Award or you can get one from a friend, then the Grand Hyatt is going to cover you for breakfast and a heavy afternoon snack that could become dinner for those younger kids. Moving further south, Colonial Williamsburg is one of those trips that sounds like it's going to be a school field trip on paper, but then in practice, it's actually a lot of fun. Fall is a perfect time to visit because it's really showing off its colors, and also you don't have those big spring crowds from the actual school trips. There are costumed interpreters, colonial-era games and crafts, there's a fife and drum parade almost every day. It's hands-on history that I think is engaging for a really wide age range, from little kids who just like the costumes, up to teens who get pulled into reenactments as Virginia militia recruits. As a little bit of an aside, I think the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation has done some great work in recent years to expand the story that they're telling beyond just the original narrow version of colonial life. So now they're including experiences of the indigenous peoples of the region, as well as enslaved communities who lived there in the 18th century, and that makes it a much more honest visit than when I went as a kid. You might want to bundle your tickets with a rental car if you can, since I recommend that you also head out to Jamestown and Yorktown Battlefield. In terms of lodging, Williamsburg Lodge is a moderate option with pool access, and I think it's worth checking out their deals and packages page for ticket bundles before you book anything separately and pay full price. Now, one really important tip if you're considering this area, the College of William & Mary, where my brother went, is right next door to CW, so make sure that you check the family weekend and homecoming dates before you lock in your trip. Those particular weekends are slammed with visitors, so it's going to be really hard to get reservations for things like tavern dinners or the pirate trial, and hotel rates are going to be through the roof. I also want to add 2 more East Coast options to this list since we just visited this summer and I did recap episodes on them for this podcast. First up is Philly. That's episode 51 if you want to grab it after this one. It was a whirlwind trip this time, honestly just about 24 hours in the city, but we packed in a lot. Independence Hall, the Liberty Bell, and some of the best Israeli food I've had anywhere in the U.S. That said, we've already spent a lot of time in Philly. This was a repeat visit for us, and I promise there are tons of great things to do to fill a whole weekend or even 4 or 5 days. You could check out the Franklin Institute, which might be one of the best science museums in the country, and there's also the Museum of the American Revolution, which we really enjoyed. American Airlines seems to own the Philadelphia airport, and if you have any Alaska miles, you can sometimes catch those shorter American flights for just 4,500 points each way. That's a steal. We stayed at the Hyatt Centric near Rittenhouse Square on a free night award, so we barely paid anything out of pocket for this trip. Our other recent East Coast weekend getaway was Boston. If you want to dive a little deeper on that, it's in episode 50. But here's the short version for anyone who missed it. Thanks to Summer Camp Pickup, we've done weekend trips to Boston each of the last 2 summers. It's such a great city if you have any history buffs in your family. Maybe my favorite thing to do in Boston with kids is the Tea Party Museum, which is incredibly well done. It uses all sorts of different multimedia experiences to engage you, from costume interpreters who include visitors in the history, to physically throwing chests of tea off of actual boats into Boston Harbor. I don't want to spoil all the surprises, but definitely put this one on your list. If you've got little kids, a fun way to see the city is on an amphibious duck tour that uses restored World War II vehicles. I would say that one is high on the fun, but a little low on content. For older kids or teens, I'd opt for a walking tour of the historic core of Boston. We did that one this summer, and it was really interesting. We stayed on points both times, so we got to sample both of the Hyatt Regencies. They're nice enough and a mega bargain compared to cash rates in Boston. We did the same trick using Alaska miles as we did for Philly, so again, a weekend in Boston can be super affordable if you're strategic with points. Your only real expenses are food, activities, and the tea. All right, now I'm going to give you 2 Florida options to round out the domestic East Coast picks, but I do want to caution that there is some risk of hurricanes. However, it's not all bad. First up is Sarasota, which is probably not on your radar. It's located a little ways south of Tampa, and it has a lower hurricane risk than Florida's East Coast and November weather that's about as close to perfect as Florida gets all year long. We went the first weekend of November a few years ago, and we had amazing weather for the beach and the pool. And speaking of beaches, you're talking about white sugar sand and basically no crowds if you're into late October or early November. The Moat Aquarium is a great wildlife stop, and you could take a naturalist-led boat ride from their dock, which was really cool and unique. We even got off in some of the mangroves to learn about all the different varieties that they have in that part of Florida. Then there's the Ringling Museum, yes, like the circus, which was really fun and interactive. If you can find a flight into the little Sarasota airport, that's ideal, and this is the perfect time to use the Southwest Companion Pass if you have one. My kids and I flew into Tampa since we didn't have a Sarasota nonstop the day that we went, and that was still easy enough, just a little bit of a drive. Unfortunately, the old Hyatt Regency we stayed at was actually torn down last year, but there are plenty of other nice hotels in the area to choose from. But I think if I mention Florida, as a family travel blogger, I am required by law to include Orlando. We went for fall break a few years ago to celebrate our son's 11th birthday by letting him matriculate at Hogwarts. Now, I am not a theme park expert, far from it in fact, but part of the reason I scheduled that trip is that October is actually one of the better times to go. Crowds are more manageable than the summer crush, and you'll get seasonal events layered on top, like Mickey's Not So Scary Halloween Party and Universal's Halloween Horror Nights. Those are capacity-controlled evening events, so you skip both the daytime heat and the daytime lines completely. But if you don't plan to go to those evening events, still check the schedules closely. You don't want to buy a regular daytime ticket and then get kicked out of the park early if you don't expect it. At that time of year, there's also Epcot's International Food and Wine Festival, which is perfect if anyone in your family is more into eating their way through a park than riding roller coasters. For hotels, Disney's Beach Club puts you walking distance from Epcot with early entry perks built in, and the Hard Rock Hotel gets you early access to Universal plus express and limited passes included, so you're not spending your whole visit waiting in line. Now, if you've got a little bit of a longer break and you want to go big, my pick for East Coasters is Iceland. Fall is the earliest point in the year when you can realistically catch the northern lights, but you're also avoiding the harsher storms that can come through in winter and early spring. Icelandair has really expanded its U.S. footprint over the last couple of years, too. It's not just JFK and Boston anymore. My friends down the road in Pittsburgh now have a nonstop to Reykjavik, as do Chicago, Raleigh-Durham, Nashville, and Orlando, which tells you just how many East Coast and Midwest cities can reach Iceland directly these days. From most of those cities, it's about a 6-hour flight, and depending on how you book, it could end up cheaper than a domestic trip. Icelandair is a partner of Alaska Airlines, so if you have any Atmos points, or you want to consider getting the Atmos Summit card or the Atmos Ascent card, you can actually book Icelandair with your Alaska miles. It's also an easier time adjustment than you'd expect for a European trip. In October, Iceland is only 4 hours ahead of the East Coast, compared to 6 hours for somewhere like Paris, so you're not fighting jet lag the whole time you're there. My friend Lana took her boys to Iceland for fall break a few years ago, and they had the perfect balance. 3 days on a guided tour covering the Golden Circle, Vik, and the Snæfellsnes Peninsula, then one self-guided day in Reykjavik to close things out at their own pace. Even though we've been to Iceland before, I would definitely consider going back for fall break if we had the flexibility, simply for the opportunity to see the Northern Lights. Moving to the middle of the country, I've personally visited Chicago in all the seasons, and I think fall might be my favorite. The weather's amazing, and it's not super crowded. It's a really walkable city, and there's just so much variety packed in. My kids love the Shedd Aquarium, and both the Field Museum, which is natural history, and the Museum of Science and Industry. Plus, there are 2 zoos, including a free one. You could check out the views from the Ferris wheel at Navy Pier, and younger kids will play for hours and hours at Maggie Daley Park, which has an amazing playground. You can skip the rental car entirely and take the Orange Line straight from Midway into downtown. That airport is really convenient, and Southwest has a million flights going in, so definitely break out your companion pass for this. If you're transferring credit card points, the Hyatt Regency Chicago is a solid redemption for families. Personally, I think the Midwest does smaller cities really well. I'm going to give you a trio of options to consider, and the right one is going to depend on where you've been before and also where you live. Cleveland surprises people from outside of Ohio anytime I bring it up. It's got a walkable downtown with some really heavy hitters. There's the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the Great Lakes Science Center, which has reciprocity with other science museums in case your family already has membership somewhere else. What I think really seals it for a fall trip is if you rent a car, it's super easy to get to Cuyahoga Valley National Park. It's just 30 minutes outside of the city, and it's got free admission, beautiful waterfalls, and some of the best fall foliage in the whole region, with much smaller crowds than you're going to find in the Northeast. We've stayed at the Hyatt Regency at the Arcade downtown, which I think is worth booking just for the building itself. It was the country's first indoor shopping center, and it was built back in 1890. The architecture is beautiful, and it's a great spot for pictures. Another option is Louisville, and I'm sorry if I pronounced that badly. I've been trying for years. I think it's the perfect size for a long weekend. You're not trying to conquer an entire major city in just 3 or 4 days, but there's enough packed in to keep everyone interested and nobody gets bored. We got to watch the thoroughbred workouts at Churchill Downs in the early morning. We toured the Louisville Slugger factory, where they still make baseball bats, and we even took a steamboat ride in the evening. Plus, there's some great day trips if you have a little more time. The Kentucky Horse Park in Lexington was perfect when our daughter was in her horse-obsessed phase. The Buffalo Trace Distillery Tour is surprisingly one of my kids' favorite things that we've done in Kentucky. And we still haven't made it to Mammoth Cave, but that's another good option, especially if you're driving in from the south. There are plenty of flights from around the country, but also about 20% of the population lives within a 4-hour drive of Louisville, so I think it's a really accessible option for a lot of you out there listening. Finally, I think St. Louis doesn't get enough credit either, but we've had so many fun trips there. The Gateway Arch has an awesome visitor center that was totally redone in 2018. It's full of interesting history, but also plenty of interactive stuff for the kids to do. Just make sure you book time tickets ahead to actually go up in the arch, because that part sells out more often than you think. The real kid magnet here is the City Museum. It's less of a traditional museum and more of an industrial chic climbing, crawling, and sliding structure that's totally disorienting and also totally fun. I'd bring some sort of tracking device if you've got younger kids, because it's easy for them to wander off in a tunnel and get completely separated from you, sometimes by multiple floors. Although I will say there are a few times when we haven't been able to connect digitally, and we've had to rely on an old school meetup spot. So I just want to throw that out as a little bit of a caution. I've got some other tips for the City Museum in my St. Louis with Kids article over on the blog, and that's linked down in the show notes. The zoo and forest park is free, and on weekdays even parking is free. And food-wise, you definitely want to hit up a barbecue spot for dinner and then follow it up with Ted Drew's for a concrete, which is their version of frozen custard that's thick enough to turn upside down without it falling out. You gotta test it and you gotta take the picture. Definitely rent a car for this one, because St. Louis is spread out enough that you're definitely gonna want one. We've stayed twice at the Hyatt Regency right next to the arch, and I'm gonna tell you the last time we went, that corner arch view room we had was absolutely massive. And the hotel is so close to the arch that you'll basically feel like you're on top of it. I've got an awesome picture over on the blog, so go check it out to see what I mean. The go big pick for this region is a little bit of a stretch to call Midwestern, and it'll work equally well for East Coasters. I'm giving a tie between two islands, Aruba and Curaçao. These are two of the three ABC islands, along with their neighbor Bonaire, and they're located just off the coast of Venezuela. Both Aruba and Curaçao are a great mix of beaches and snorkeling, with enough Dutch colonial charm in the town centers to give your trip some culture too. You'll be outside of the official hurricane belt, so you might get passing showers, but you're not going to have major storms that ruin the whole day or even your whole trip. The islands are on Atlantic Standard Time year-round, which means there's barely any time change. From a practical perspective, Aruba has more non-stop options and also some good hotel options on points, while Curaçao's non-stops are more limited, but the island is a lot less developed, so there's a lot of peace and plenty of sand when you go to the far side of the island where we stayed during our visit. All right, my mountain and West Coast people, now it's your turn. Arizona in the fall is really about squeezing out the last bit of summer pool weather while everyone else in the country is taking their coats out of storage. You're looking at daytime temperatures in the 80s, but for nights, you might want your favorite hoodie. Base yourself in Phoenix if pool time and family activities are the priority, although there are so many things to do around the area if you want variety. There are all different levels of desert hikes, the Musical Instrument Museum, the Heard Museum for Indigenous Art and Culture, and plenty of others. There are also some really excellent day trips that you just can't do anywhere else in the country. This summer we went back and finally stayed at the Grand Hyatt Scottsdale, and you can catch my quick recap of that trip in episode 44. Over the last 30 years, I've spent more time in Arizona than anywhere else I haven't officially lived, so you don't want to miss my huge article on the blog with things to do with kids in Scottsdale and Phoenix. I've also covered a lot of other parts of the state since we've traveled there so much and in every season. San Diego has a very specific reason to plan a visit for October. The annual Kids Free San Diego promotion, which covers free child admission at more than 50 venues around the city, including the San Diego Zoo, Safari Park, and the USS Midway Museum. That alone is going to offset a decent chunk of the trip cost. The Hyatt Regency Mission Bay is a great home base. It's got 3 heated pools with water slides, and they'll hand you kayaks and bikes right from the property, so you're not renting gear separately. I set my brother-in-law up to stay there last year with his family, and they had a blast. It's also still a Category 4 hotel, so you can use a Hyatt free night certificate there, or you can use a totally reasonable number of points to book into a standard suite that'll sleep 5 people. In terms of flights, competition at San Diego has definitely been heating up in the last few years, with both Southwest and Alaska expanding their service, so there's a good chance you'll be able to find bargain flights whether you're booking with cash or points. Further north in California, Yosemite National Park definitely deserves a shout out because fall is a great time to go, and most people overlook it entirely in favor of summer. Peak foliage hits around mid-October, and you're looking at roughly half the visitors that you'd get in the summer months, dropping even further once you go to November. And unlike winter or early spring, when we last visited, most of the park is actually open and accessible in fall. The downside is that you're probably not going to see raging waterfalls like you would earlier in the year, but places like Tunnel View, the full Yosemite Valley Loop, and the giant sequoias at Mariposa Grove, it's all there without the crowds. The mist trail up to Vernal Falls is especially good if you can catch it right after a bit of rain. On the weekends, you might still see some crowds from Bay Area people coming in, but if you stay into Monday, Tuesday, or even Wednesday, you should have the place mostly to yourself. You can fly into Fresno, which is about 90 minutes from the park, and there are direct flights from a surprising number of cities in the western half of the country. For lodging, book the Yosemite Valley Lodge if you want to be right in the center of the park, or look at Tenaya Resort near Wawona on the south end if you want a spa and more on-site activities to layer into your trip. All right, here's the go big option for those of you who are living in West Coast cities, because you're looking at 5, maybe 6 hours in the air each way to get to one of my favorite places in the world. Obviously, it's Hawaii. If your school is kind enough to give you 5 days off, including that weekend, you can make this happen, and without burning your whole break on travel days. You can leave from California in the morning and have lunch in Waikiki. Isn't that insane? It's just not the case when you're flying from somewhere like Ohio, where we live now. Personally, I think 5 days in Hawaii is worth it if you've got a nonstop from the West Coast. The time difference is only 2 or 3 hours, so you're not dealing with huge jet lag on either end, and that matters a lot when you're only there for, let's say, 5 days, and you don't want to lose the first one recovering or come back feeling awful when the kids have to get back to school. Fall is also one of the cheapest times of year to go to Hawaii, and it's one of the least crowded, which is a combination that you're not going to get often in a destination that's so popular. We spent 5 weeks on Oahu back in October and November of 2018, and it was honestly magical. We had the entire island basically to ourselves. Beaches that would normally be packed were nearly empty. Restaurants didn't need reservations, and there was just a different, slower pace to the whole island. When we went back to Oahu over winter break a few years later, it was a completely different experience. More crowded, more expensive, and a much more frantic energy everywhere we went. I think Pearl Harbor is the perfect example of what I'm talking about. When we went in the fall, we got tickets literally the morning we wanted to go, and we just had to be a little flexible about which hour we went. In the winter, we tried for 4 days straight and we couldn't snag tickets at all. Same island, same activities available on paper, but a totally different vibe depending on when you go. So if you've got 5 days and you're within striking distance of the West Coast, I'd just go for it. Snorkeling, hiking, beach time, all of it's there in October and November, minus the crowds and minus that peak pricing that you'd hit over winter and spring breaks. You're not sacrificing much by going shorter and cheaper in fall instead of holding out for a longer trip during a more expensive and more crowded window. Okay, West Coasters, you get a bonus go big pick, but I have to be upfront about it. We have not actually done this trip ourselves, but it's on our list, especially for me and my husband. La Paz, down in the Baja Peninsula, has been on the top of Ronnie's bucket list for a long time. Late October into November is when the water starts cooling off and the weather turns more pleasant, and it's late enough in the year that you've got a real shot at swimming with whale sharks. Like I said, bucket list stuff, right? It's only about a 2.5-hour flight nonstop from LAX, and until early November, it's in the same time zone as LA, so jet lag is basically not a factor. There are plenty of beautiful places to stay for like $150 a night or less, and that's hard to beat for a beach trip. If we ever make it there, you know I'll be telling you all about it, but it's on this list for a reason, and if any of you guys out there have done it, I want to hear how it went and hear your tips for our other listeners. So there's our full list, more than a dozen different ways that you could spend your fall break, no matter what kind of traveler you are or where you're coming from. If you want a complete write-up with every hotel and points detail in one place, it's linked down in the show notes and over on thefamilyvoyage.com. That's it for our first episode of Season 2. I hope this was as fun for you as it was for me, and that you'll stick around to hear more. Be sure to hit follow wherever you're listening, turn on notifications or whatever your app tells you to do so that you get notified when the next episode is live. And if you thought this was useful, share it with a friend and leave a quick 5-star review because it really does help other families find us, and that's what keeps the show going. Until next time, safe travels!